When the web was still new enough to feel like a frontier town, two grad students at Stanford took a long, leisurely wander through its dusty streets and came back with a map that would change how the world navigates information. This is the story of David Filo, the quietly brilliant engineer who preferred code to cameras, catalogs to headlines, and who, with his friend Jerry Yang, turned a personal hobby into one of the internet's most recognizable brands. David Robert Filo was born in 1966 in Wisconsin, but spent much of his childhood in Louisiana, where an upbringing in an unconventional, close-knit community planted the seeds of curiosity and self-reliance that would later shape his approach to technology. Even as a boy, he had a knack for taking things apart and understanding what made them work, a trait that eventually translated into a talent for building systems rather than just using them. He went on to study computer and electrical engineering at Tulane University and later at Stanford, where he earned a master's degree and found himself surrounded by a culture that encouraged experimentation and lateral thinking. At Stanford in the early 1990s, the internet felt less like a polished product and more like a vast experimental playground. Filo and Yang were both electrical engineering graduate students, working on projects that had little to do with the burgeoning World Wide Web. When their faculty advisor took a sabbatical and deadlines loosened, the two found themselves spending time exploring the nascent web, bookmarking interesting pages, collecting useful links, and swapping discoveries with classmates. What began as a private set of bookmarks and a friendly directory soon evolved into something bigger, Jerry and David's Guide to the World Wide Web, a curated list of sites organized into categories, written and maintained by hand. It was simple, human, and incredibly useful in an era when search engines didn't yet know how to make sense of the web's chaos. The name came from an unlikely place. They called it Yahoo because they liked the word's playful, almost irreverent connotation, a reference, they later said, not to an acronym, but to a character from Gulliver's Travels, crude, uncouth, and delightful. The name stuck. What did not stick, at least initially, was any grand plan for a company. The site was a labor of love, updated by hand and admired by early web users for its human touch. But the traffic grew fast. By late 1994, with visits multiplying and people emailing in suggestions, Filo and Yang realized that what they had built could be a platform, not merely a hobby. They incorporated Yahoo in March 1995 and began to imagine a future in which people would rely on a portal, a single place that helped them find email, news, shopping, and more. David Filo was always the technical yin to Jerry Yang's more outward-facing yang. If Yang was the public face and the storyteller, Filo was the architect in the back room, writing the software that made Yahoo run. He authored the Filo server program, the server-side software that generated the early dynamic pages on Yahoo and kept the directory updated. Where others saw lists of links, Filo saw taxonomy, performance bottlenecks, and the elegantly efficient code that could scale. His focus was on precision and reliability, the unsung work that lets a website serve millions of people without breaking a sweat. That emphasis on engineering excellence became a hallmark of Yahoo in its formative years, and it's an often overlooked reason the company could absorb an onslaught of users in the mid-1990s. The timing of Yahoo's rise could not have been more fortuitous. The mid-1990s were the dot-com boom. Investors wanted exposure to anything internet-related, and users were discovering the web for the first time. Yahoo rode that wave beautifully. After securing venture backing, hiring a handful of people, and expanding its directory into a comprehensive portal, Yahoo went public on April 12, 1996. The IPO was a spectacle. Shares priced modestly opened and then shot up, delivering instant wealth to the company's founders and early investors. For Filo, the IPO was less a lifestyle change than a scaling problem. Suddenly, the technical challenges became corporate imperatives. How do you keep a portal up and fast when millions of people are knocking at the door? How do you build infrastructure that supports not just links, but mail, news feeds, and commerce? Filo's answers were practical, engineering-first solutions, and they helped Yahoo grow into a company with worldwide reach. For many, the wonder of Yahoo wasn't just its search or directory, it was its personality. Yahoo aggregated news, offered email, hosted communities, and even dabbled in quirky features that made it feel like a friendly online city square. Yet its journey from cultural darling to one of many internet brands is a study in both opportunity and missed pivots. As Google refined search with algorithms that scaled far more efficiently, and as new social networks and platforms emerged, Yahoo's sprawling assortment of services sometimes felt unfocused. Decisions at the executive level, acquisition strategies that didn't always pay off, and the difficulty of translating early cultural capital into long-term technological dominance created headwinds that even brilliant engineers like Filo couldn't entirely correct. Still, the company's influence was enormous. It taught millions how to navigate the web, it created new advertising models, and it helped build the infrastructure of online presence in the 1990s and 2000s. Despite the public attention that came with becoming a billionaire, David Filo remained famously private and understated. He was not a CEO who chased headlines. Instead, he embraced philanthropy, quietly giving back to institutions that shaped his life. One of the most notable gifts came in 2005 when he donated $30 million to Tulane University's engineering school, a donation aimed at creating opportunities for future engineers and strengthening the educational institutions that produce technical talent. Filo and his wife, Angela Buenning, who is a photographer and teacher, also supported Stanford and UC Berkeley programs, especially those focusing on sustainability and journalism. These acts of giving reflected a belief that building the tools of the future also carries a responsibility to invest in the people who will steward them. There are a few stories from Yahoo's early days that capture the mixture of humility and quiet genius that defined Filo. One anecdote often told in Silicon Valley corridors involves the early servers that hosted Yahoo's directory. In those pre-cloud days, engineers had to be scrappy, designing systems to cache pages, route queries efficiently, and keep logs from overflowing. Filo's deep attention to the server side, his habit of obsessing over performance metrics and edge case failures, meant Yahoo could sustain user growth without collapsing into the sort of outages that torpedo fledgling web services. Those small technical choices, which seem pedestrian on the surface, became the scaffolding for a brand that served hundreds of millions of users. If the web's early triumphs were architectural, much of that architecture was Filo's doing. The public story of Yahoo is, of course, a roller coaster. Meteoric growth during the dot-com boom, a tumultuous battle for strategic direction as competitors arose, and eventual acquisition by larger corporate entities. But behind those headlines is a quieter narrative about culture, how two students with a shared curiosity and complementary skills built something greater than themselves. Filo's engineering mindset, methodical, precise, and focused on durable solutions, provided a counterbalance to the marketing and product instincts that pushed Yahoo into new verticals. It's a lesson in startup dynamics. Success rarely belongs to one person or one talent alone. It belongs to the mix of people who can translate vision into code and code into habits. What made David Filo's work especially enduring was his refusal to fetishize hype over substance. In an era when founders increasingly chase valuation headlines and media profiles, Filo's path was refreshingly technical. He famously preferred to be called Chief Yahoo rather than CEO, a title that underscored his desire to remain close to the product rather than to investor relations or showy publicity. That approach nurtured a culture at Yahoo in which engineers could take pride in the elegance of their solutions, and where the primary metric was whether something worked reliably at scale. For students and young engineers today, Filo's example is a blueprint. Build things that people use, focus on the boring problems that make products stable, and let scale be the measure of your success, rather than the promise of a flashy exit. Of course, entrepreneurship is also about timing and temperament. Yahoo's early dominance owed as much to timing as to technological creativity. The web was expanding quickly, and Yahoo filled a fundamental need: organization. Later, as the web matured and search algorithms improved, different strengths became more valuable. Yahoo had to juggle an increasing number of services and acquisitions, and the company's corporate evolution introduced complexities that technical solutions alone could not solve. Filo's steady hands on the engineering tiller mitigated many of these issues, but full-time leadership in a conglomerate-sized portal requires a strategic art that encompasses product, partnerships, and market positioning, domains where Filo was often content to defer to others. That humility, while admirable, illustrates a key tension for founders, knowing when to stay in your technical lane and when to step into the broader business spotlight. When we speak about how David Filo became a billionaire, it is important to separate the human from the headlines. The wealth came from the business that grew from the site he and Yang built, venture funding that recognized the portal's promise, an IPO that converted paper into profound personal wealth, and years of operation and reinvestment that kept Yahoo as a major internet player. But Filo's story is also a cautionary tale about scale and adaptation. Great engineering gives a product a fighting chance. But markets change, competitors innovate, and companies must pivot or perish. Filo's legacy, then, is twofold. He helped create a tool that taught the world how to use the internet, and he embodied the virtue that perhaps matters most for technology builders, a devotion to craft over spectacle. Beyond business and engineering, David Filo's life hints at the quieter human satisfactions that money cannot purchase. He and his family have kept a relatively low public profile, favoring private philanthropy and community engagement over constant media presence. His donations to educational institutions reflect a belief in creating long-term value rather than short-term acclaim. And like many early internet pioneers, Filo seems to regard his work as part of a larger cultural experiment, making information accessible and usable for everyone. In that light, Yahoo is a chapter in an ongoing story, one that includes many other pioneers, technological reversals, and new models for how people connect and learn online. What lessons should aspiring founders and engineers take from David Filo's life? First, the importance of craftsmanship. Obsess over the small things, latency, uptime, and user experience, because they compound when millions of people use your product. Second, the value of complementary partnerships. Filo and Yang's friendship combined different strengths and made the whole better than the sum of its parts. Third, the power of humility. Staying grounded and quietly competent can outlast flash-in-the-pan charisma. And finally, an ethic of giving back. Success measured by what you build and what you leave behind is a richer definition than success measured by net worth alone. In the end, David Filo's name may not be the first that comes to mind when people remember the web's pioneers, but his fingerprints are everywhere. The servers that served pages, the software that kept directories updated, the engineering culture that insisted things work even under strain. These are the things that make digital life possible. Yahoo was never just a logo or a homepage. It was the product of patient work by people like Filo who preferred to solve problems rather than cultivate personas. For anyone curious about the making of the modern internet, his story is a reminder that the quiet engineers who fix the plumbing often deserve as much credit as the loud visionaries who sell the dream. If you close your eyes and picture the early web, imagine a cluttered, unruly space where links were scattered like postcards across a vast table. Then imagine two students, a pile of bookmarks, and the laborious act of curating something better. Out of that, a map was made, and out of that map, millions of people learned to find their way. That map was Yahoo. And the mapmaker, David Filo, never stopped caring about how the map worked. His life is the story of a builder who helped shape the internet's early pathways, and who, by focusing on the durable craft of engineering, left an imprint on how we organize, access, and think about information to this day.